The rain battered the cobblestone streets of Boston, a relentless drumming that matched the frantic pulse in Ethan Cole's chest as he pushed through the front door of his Back Bay brownstone. He wasn't supposed to be home this early. His board meeting had been cut short by a power outage at the downtown office, but something deeper, something instinctive, had urged him to return. The house was eerily quiet, save for the soft patter of rain against the tall windows and a faint, heart-wrenching sound that stopped him cold, the muffled sob of his 7-year-old daughter, Lila. Ethan's polished shoes froze on the hardwood floor. His daughter, blind since birth, was his world, and the thought of her in distress clawed at his soul. He moved toward the sound, his heart thundering, only to halt at the threshold of the living room. There, bathed in the dim glow of a single lamp, was a sight that shattered his carefully constructed reality: Sofia, the new nanny, cradling Lila in her arms, whispering words of comfort as the little girl clung to her, trembling. But it wasn't just the tenderness of the scene that stole Ethan's breath, it was the faint, purple bruise blooming on Lila's tiny wrist, a mark that screamed of a truth he'd been too blind to see. If this moment tugs at your heart, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds, please hit that like button, drop a comment, share this story, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks. Your support helps us share more stories that remind us all of the beauty in humanity. Ethan Cole was a man who had built an empire from nothing. At 38, he was Boston's golden son, a tech mogul whose name adorned skyscrapers and charity galas alike. His life was a mosaic of boardrooms, private jets, and the kind of wealth that made problems vanish with a single phone call. But none of that mattered when it came to Lila. Born prematurely, her blindness had been a cruel twist of fate, one that Ethan had spent years trying to fix with the best doctors, the most experimental treatments, and an unwavering belief that his money could shield her from the world's harshness. He'd hired nannies before, polished professionals with impeccable resumes, but none had lasted. They were too cold, too detached, or simply unable to connect with Lila's quiet, intuitive spirit. Then came Sofia Alvarez, a soft-spoken woman in her late 20s with warm brown eyes and a smile that seemed to carry the weight of her own unspoken sorrows. She'd only been with them for 3 weeks, hired through a trusted agency after a glowing recommendation. Ethan had barely spoken to her, too consumed with work to notice much beyond her gentle demeanor and Lila's growing fondness for her. But now, standing in the shadows of his own home, Ethan realized he'd missed something vital, something that was about to unravel everything. The bruise on Lila's wrist wasn't the only mark Ethan noticed as he stepped closer, his breath catching in his throat. There was a faint redness on her forearm, barely visible under the sleeve of her sweater, and a stiffness in the way she held herself, as if guarding against an unseen threat. Sofia's voice was a soft murmur, her hands steady as she brushed Lila's dark curls from her tear-streaked face. Ethan's mind raced, piecing together fragments of moments he'd overlooked: Lila's recent quietness, her reluctance to be around certain people, the way she'd flinched when Ethan's fiancée, Vanessa, had raised her voice during a dinner last week. Vanessa. The name hit him like a punch. She'd been in his life for 2 years, a poised, glamorous woman who'd swept into his world with charm and ambition. Everyone loved her, his colleagues, his friends, even the press, who called her the perfect match for Boston's most eligible bachelor. She'd been kind to Lila, or so Ethan thought, showering her with gifts and affection. But as he watched Sofia cradle his daughter, a sickening realization began to form. Had he been so blinded by Vanessa's polish, by the image of a perfect family, that he'd failed to see what was happening under his own roof? Ethan's hands clenched into fists, his nails digging into his palms as he fought the urge to storm into the room and demand answers. But something in Sofia's posture, her fierce protectiveness, the way she shielded Lila as if she were her own, kept him rooted in place. He needed to understand, to know the truth before he acted. Quietly, he retreated to the hallway, his mind a storm of guilt and rage. He thought back to the past few weeks, to the moments when Lila had seemed withdrawn, her laughter replaced by a quiet hesitance. He chalked it up to her adjusting to Sofia, to the challenges of her blindness, to anything but the possibility that someone in his carefully curated world could hurt her. Vanessa had been at the house often, insisting on spending time with Lila to bond as a future stepmother. Ethan had been grateful, relieved even, that Lila would have a maternal figure. But now, the memory of Vanessa's sharp tone, her impatience when Lila struggled to navigate a new toy, took on a sinister edge. Had those moments been more than frustration? Had they crossed a line into something darker? Sofia's voice drifted from the living room, low and soothing, as she told Lila a story about a brave little girl who could see the world with her heart. Ethan leaned against the wall, his chest tight with emotion. He didn't know Sofia well, but in that moment, he saw her with new eyes. She wasn't just a nanny doing her job, she was a lifeline, a beacon of warmth in a world that had suddenly turned cold. He thought about her application, the sparse details she'd shared during her interview, a childhood in a small New England town, a degree in early childhood education, and a quiet passion for helping children with disabilities. There'd been a sadness in her eyes, a hint of a past she didn't speak of, but Ethan hadn't pressed. Now, he wished he had. Who was this woman who'd stepped into their lives and, in 3 short weeks, become the protector his daughter so desperately needed? The next morning, Ethan called in sick, a rarity for a man whose schedule was planned to the minute. He needed to watch, to observe, to confirm the suspicions that had kept him awake all night. Vanessa was due to visit that afternoon, and Ethan made sure to be home, stationed in his study with the door ajar. Sofia arrived early, her usual routine of preparing breakfast for Lila filled with small, tender gestures, guiding Lila's hands to the table, describing the colors of the fruit she placed in front of her, laughing softly when Lila giggled at a silly joke. Ethan's heart ached at the sight. Lila was more herself with Sofia, her small face alight with a trust Ethan hadn't seen in weeks. When Vanessa arrived, her heels clicking sharply on the floor, the air in the house shifted. Lila's smile faded, her body tensing as Vanessa's voice filled the room, bright and overly sweet. Ethan watched from the shadows, his jaw tight, as Vanessa bent to kiss Lila's forehead. The little girl flinched, almost imperceptibly, but it was enough. Ethan's blood ran cold. Over the next few days, Ethan became a detective in his own home. He installed discreet cameras, something he'd never thought he'd do, driven by a need to protect Lila at all costs. The footage was damning. Vanessa, alone with Lila, was a different woman from the one Ethan knew. Her patience was a facade, crumbling the moment she thought no one was watching. Sharp words, a grip too tight on Lila's arm, a shove when Lila stumbled, all captured in grainy clarity. Ethan's world tilted. The woman he'd planned to marry, the woman he'd trusted with his daughter, was a stranger. Worse, she was a threat. The guilt was crushing. How had he let this happen? How had he failed Lila so completely? He thought of his late wife, Lila's mother, who died when Lila was barely a year old. He'd promised her he'd keep the daughter safe, and now that promise lay in tatters. Confronting Vanessa was a storm of its own. Ethan waited until Lila was asleep, Sofia tucking her in with a gentleness that made his chest ache. In the living room, he faced Vanessa, his voice steady but laced with fury. He showed her the footage, watching as her face paled, her excuses stumbling over one another. She claimed it was stress, that she loved Lila, that she'd never meant to hurt her. But Ethan saw through the lies. He ended the engagement on the spot, his voice cold as he told her to leave and never return. Vanessa's tears, her pleas, fell on deaf ears. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the weight of his own power, not as a millionaire, but as a father willing to do anything to protect his child. In the aftermath, Ethan turned to Sofia. He needed to understand how she'd known, how she'd seen what he'd missed. Over coffee in the quiet of the kitchen, Sofia shared her story. She'd grown up in a home where bruises weren't always visible, where harsh words left scars no one could see. She'd recognized the signs in Lila, the quiet fear, the subtle withdrawal, and had acted on instinct, staying close, offering comfort, watching Vanessa like a hawk. Sofia's own pain had made her a guardian, a shield for a little girl who reminded her of herself. Ethan listened, his heart breaking for both Sofia and Lila. He saw the strength in her, the resilience born of surviving her own battles. And in that moment, something shifted. It wasn't just gratitude he felt, but a stirring of something deeper, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel since his wife's death. The weeks that followed were a time of healing. Ethan took a leave from work, dedicating himself to Lila. He learned to listen to her, to really hear her, guided by Sofia's quiet wisdom. Together, they rebuilt Lila's world, filling it with music, stories, and the kind of love that didn't demand perfection. The bruise on Lila's wrist faded, but Ethan knew the emotional scars would take longer. He hired a therapist for Lila, someone who specialized in helping children process trauma. And through it all, Sofia was there, not just as a nanny, but as a steady presence, a light in the darkness. Ethan found himself watching her, noticing the way her laughter lit up a room, the way her hands moved with purpose and care. He was falling for her, slowly, against his own rules. But Sofia was guarded, her own heart bruised by a past she rarely spoke of. Ethan didn't push, but he made a silent promise to earn her trust, just as she'd earned Lila's. One evening, as the first snow of winter dusted the Boston streets, Ethan found Sofia in the garden, staring at the stars. Lila was asleep inside, tucked under a blanket Sofia had knitted for her. Ethan joined her, the silence between them comfortable but charged with unspoken words. He thanked her, not just for protecting Lila, but for showing him what it meant to truly see. Sofia's eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of something, hope, perhaps, or the possibility of something new. They stood there, two broken souls finding solace in each other, the snow falling softly around them. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, not yet. But it was a beginning, a chance to rebuild, to love again, to create a family not bound by wealth or status, but by trust and care. This story of Ethan, Lila, and Sofia is a reminder that love can heal even the deepest wounds, that kindness can light the darkest paths. If their journey touched your heart, if it made you believe in second chances and the power of protecting those we love, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks. And in the comments, tell us, what's a moment of kindness that changed your life? We'd love to hear your story.